Hello friends, whenever we talk about India, we automatically say one thing, that India is a democracy. Today, I want you to take pause on this statement and ask some deeper questions. That is India only a democracy? If a party won an election with a larger majority, then can Parliament do anything what it wants? Can an elected majority remove every constitutional limit? Can it silence every dissenting voice? Can it change the federal structure just because they have won the elections? Friends, the answer to these questions will take us from the electoral democracy to the constitutional democracy, where elections tell us that who receive the authority to govern, and constitution tells that authority how it must be exercised, what it cannot do, and which institution can call it to account. Understand it in a simple way, that elections provide authority to govern and constitution provides direction to this authority. Friends, in our previous lectures, lecture 1, 2 and 3, we understood some basic vocabulary about polity and the constitution. We understood what is constitution, what is constitutionalism, and we got to know the constitutional philosophy, the concepts of constitutional philosophy. And in today's lecture, we combine them all. By the end of today's lecture, you will be able to explain in one coherent answer that why India is a sovereign, democratic and republican nation, that why our executive is parliamentary in nature, that why is our parliament is powerful but not unaccountable, that why federalism, judicial review and basic structure matters for us. Friends, welcome to GTA Learnings. My name is Tarun and let's get started. Friends, notice these words very carefully: Indian, constitutional and democracy. Where Indian reminds us our historical needs and diversity, where constitutional means that public power exists within the higher legal framework, and democratic means that people are the ultimate source of the political authority. Friends, none of these words are ornament. If they are put together, then each changes the meaning of the other. Friends, here we need to understand very carefully that majority without constitutional limits may be electoral but yet unjust. Similarly, constitutional limits without public participation may be legalistic but yet undemocratic. Friends, understand this carefully, that India's design tries to combine the popular government with limited government and along with transformational constitutional goals. Friends, now let us understand that what is the meaning of India as a sovereign state. So here, sovereignty in a simple words means India is not legally subordinate to any foreign crown, any foreign parliament or any external government. It decides its constitutional, political and policy choices through its own institutions. Friends, there are two connected ideas. One is external, that is India is independent in its relations with external states. And another is internal, and that is the constitution begins with we the people of India. It means that the constitutional authority is traced to the people of this country, not to any monarch or an imperial grant. Friends, but here you need to understand that sovereignty does not mean that whichever government is in office becomes unlimited. The state is sovereign. The temporary government is not the owner of this sovereignty. The government receives constitutionally defined powers and must exercise them through law. Friends, understand it in this way. A country like India may establish economic relationship with other nations, may establish economic and cultural relationships with other organizations where multiple nations are participant. But it doesn't mean that India as a country is compromising its sovereignty. While being a member of such groups, while forming such relationships with other countries, India is equally free, sovereign to take its own decisions, to form any relationship with any country, and to make any internal decision. So here we need to understand very carefully that sovereignty means, in a simple way, that no external power has an influence on us as a country. We are free to take any decision, any actions within the country, and we are free to establish any relationship with any country outside of the country. Friends, let us understand that what is the meaning of India as a democratic state. Here, democracy means that the people are the source of political authority. And in a vast country like India, they exercise the concept of democracy through universal adult franchise, that is right to vote. And what it says in our India, the definition of adult is any person who is more than 18 years of age is called adult. So everyone in our India who is 18 plus has a right to vote. No government, no person can stop a person to vote if he or she is 18 plus. So this is what the meaning of universal adult franchise in our India. And one person, one vote. So that is why it is said that in India, the democracy is exercised by the universal adult franchise and by periodic elections and representation and accountable government. The ruling party can be removed peacefully by voters, and that possibility is central to the democratic accountability. But friends, here voting is the entry gate, not the entire house. Between the elections, the citizens remain right-bearing members of the political community. The opposition remains legitimate. Public decisions must follow the procedures. The institutions must give reasons, face scrutiny, and operate under law. Rights, independent judiciary, free political competition, and public reasoning prevent democracy from collapsing into the rule of a momentary majority. Friends, let's take an example. Suppose 70% of a class votes to deny the remaining 30% the right to speak. Here, the vote is numerically majoritarian, but the outcome is not constitutionally democratic. The numbers confer the government authority, but they do not erase dignity and rights. So friends, do you remember that in our lecture 2 we discussed that Constitution provides the authority and constitutionalism provides that how that authority to be exercised, within what limits and for what values. So here in a constitutional democracy, democracy tells us who governs, and the values of the constitutionalism tells that how that elected government will perform their functions, within what limit and what values that elected government will follow. So friends, whenever we say that India is a democratic state, so we need to understand that India follows the idea of constitution, and that constitution follows the idea of constitutionalism, which follows the concepts of the constitutional philosophy. So here, merely saying that India is a democratic state doesn't mean that the popular government is elected and free to do anything it wants. Here, it means that the popular elected government is limited by the constitution, carries values to the constitution, and perform duties in the direction of transformative and progressive society. Friends, now let's understand what is the meaning of India as a republic. Here, republic means that the head of the state will be elected. That India has no hereditary head of the state. Now, who is the head of the state in India? So the answer is, the President of India is the official head of the state in India. And the President holds office through an indirect constitutional election. Now friends, what is this indirect constitutional election, or why indirect constitutional election? We will understand this when we will study President of India. Here, we need to understand one simple thing, that the head of the state of India, that is President of India, is elected, not hereditary. And that makes the India as a republic. And wait, this office of the president has a fixed tenure. It doesn't like that once a president, always a president. In our India, president has a fixed 5-year tenure under constitutional qualifications and procedures, and this office does not pass by birth. Friends, we need to understand that republic and democracy both are related to each other, but both are not same. A constitutional monarchy may be democratic with a hereditary monarch. That makes it democratic but not republic. The best example is Britain, where the king of the Britain is the head of the nation, is the head of the state. Conversely, merely calling a state republic does not guarantee meaningful democracy. The best example is China, People's Republic of China. That is the republic state. The head of the state is elected, but at the same time, it is not democratic. Friends, for India, democratic republic combines popular authority with a non-hereditary headship of state. So here, in India, we have the combination of democracy and a republic. It means that the head of the state is elected and the source of the power resides with the people of this country. Friends, now understand this more carefully, that the deeper republican idea is that public offices are not family property or personal privilege. Whether one is president, prime minister, minister, judge or civil servant, the authority belongs to the office and is exercised for public purposes. A public office is a constitutional trust. When a minister uses his official power for private revenge, then the problem is not only the bad administration. It violates the republican ethic that a public power must serve a public purpose. Friends, now let us understand the meaning of parliamentary democracy. Remember this here, that India adopted parliamentary system at the union and at the state level. And the core idea behind this parliamentary system is the responsibility. Now the question is that whose responsibility? So friends, before moving forward, here we need to understand some core technical things. Number one, what is parliament? Number two, what is parliamentary democratic system? So here, parliament, it is a process of making legislature. It is an institution. And parliamentary system, it is a governance system. It is a different thing. Here you need to remember that India adopted parliamentary system at union as well as at the state level. So there is a term which is known as the councils of minister. Now what is that? The councils of minister is a council of all union ministers. So now this council is collectively responsible to the House of People. This is what is the meaning of parliamentary system. Now wherever if you will see that what is the meaning of parliamentary system in Indian Constitution, so you need to answer in one single line that councils of minister is collectively responsible to the House of People, or you can say it is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. So here the parliamentary system defines a collective responsibility, not a single responsibility. For an example, if a single minister resigns from his post, so this will not fall under the idea of collective responsibility, or this will not fall under the idea of parliamentary system. Now if all ministers collectively, that is the council of ministers, all ministers collectively they resign, then it will fall under the idea of collective responsibility, or you can say then it will fall under the idea of parliamentary system of governance. So that is why whenever there is a question arises that what is the parliamentary system means in Indian democratic system, so in single line we need to say that the councils of minister is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, or you can say the councils of minister is collectively responsible to the House of People. Now let us understand it in this way. At the union, the President of India is the head of the state. The Prime Minister and the councils of ministers exercises real executive authority but within the constitutional scheme. And this councils of minister, which is headed by the Prime Minister, enjoys the confidence of Lok Sabha, House of People. If it loses the confidence, then it cannot constitutionally continue. and it must resign or seek the appropriate democratic course. This creates a continuous relationship between executive leadership and legislative accountability. Friends, here you need to be more careful. Do not assume that the executive and the legislature both are same. There is institutional distinction, but personal and professional responsibility overlaps. Ministers are accountable through questions, debates, committees, motions, and ultimately confidence. Here, think of responsibility as a live connection, not a 5-year receipt. Here, elections establish a mandate and the parliamentary processes scrutinize the government during its tenure. Friends, we will study the president, the prime minister, the councils of ministers, the parliament, the parliamentary procedures, the confidence mechanism and committees later in their dedicated chapters. But here you need to understand one simple thing, that parliamentary system means that councils of ministers is collectively responsible to the House of People. Friends, now let us discuss the concept of constitutional supremacy and the parliamentary supremacy. We discussed in our previous lectures as well that in Britain they observe the parliamentary supremacy concept, and in India we observe the constitutional supremacy concept. Now let us discuss that what are these two different concepts are. So understand this more carefully. In India, constitution is supreme. The parliament is not outside or above the constitution. The parliament is constituted by the constitution. Here, the constitution defines legislative fields, procedures, rights, institutional relationships, and judicial remedies. The parliament has wide law-making authority, yet an ordinary law that violates the constitutional limitations can be tested by courts and, where appropriate, declared invalid. Friends, Parliament has wide law-making authority, but still, a law made by the Parliament can be challenged in a court on the basis of that it violates the constitutional limitation and can be declared void. And at the same time, Parliament also has the constituent power to amend the constitution under Article 368. But that power is not identical to unlimited ownership of the constitution. So here, the constitution itself put restriction over the law-making power of the parliament as well as the constituent power to amend the constitution as well. Friends, now let us understand the Britain's parliamentary supremacy system. In the United Kingdom's classical constitutional understanding, the parliament is legally sovereign. Courts do not invalidate an act of the UK's parliament merely for violating the codified higher constitution. Friends, here you need to understand it more carefully. The modern UK system is nuanced by statutes, conventions, devolutions, and international arrangements. But the basic UPSC distinction remains useful. India deliberately combines the parliamentary government system and constitutional supremacy. This is the key sentence. India adopted parliamentary responsibility, not British-style unlimited parliamentary sovereignty. Friends, here do not confuse by that Indian parliament is not sovereign, it means India is not sovereign. Both are different and distinct concepts. Here, parliament sovereignty defines that parliament is authorized to do anything, and a country's sovereignty means a state, for example India, is free to do anything internally and free to form any relationship with any country without any external influence. That is what the state sovereignty means. So here, in context of Indian parliamentary system, understand it in this way, that Indian constitution is a supreme legal document and other institutions such as parliament, executive and judiciary are actually formed by the constitution itself, and none of the institution is having power above to the constitution, or none of the institution having a power which can override the constitution values. But be careful, when we talk about India, so the people of this country are the supreme source of all legal authority present here inside of this country. Friends, here we need to understand that Parliament is the most powerful constitutional player and can change many rules through prescribed constitutional amendment process. But it does not stand outside the constitutional order and cannot behave as its absolute master. The Constitution allocates power, the judicial review checks the constitutional validity, and the basic structure doctrine places substantive limits on destructive amendments. Friends, now let us ask a question that why it is democratic rather than anti-democratic? Because the Constitution is itself a legal framework through which the people authorizes and limit the institutions. The constitutional limits protect the conditions that make future democracy possible. The rights, fair competition, federal balance, judicial review, and accountable government. Friends, now let's take a view of Indian government system and Britain's government system. Friends, here we need to understand a very important thing, that India and Britain both have parliamentary government system. Both have a cabinet headed by Prime Minister and political responsibility to the lower house. The similarity is real, but here the limit is also equally important. India places parliamentary government inside of written supreme constitution, a federal distribution of powers, guaranteed fundamental rights, and judicial review. Friends, now it is time to have a glimpse of India's federal spirit. It is a time to have some understanding about judicial review process, and it is time to have a little idea about the doctrine of basic structure. But be careful, the detailed lectures on these topics are upcoming. Here, I am just trying to make you little familiar with these topics. So let's have an idea of India's federal system first. Friends, Article 1 describes India as a union of states. The constitutional power is distributed in between union and states. There are two levels of government with constitutionally assigned spheres, a written constitution, an independent judiciary, and mechanism for intergovernmental relations. These are the federal features. At the same time, India's design gives the union government a significant strength. The constitutional choice reflected partition, integration, security, developmental coordination, and the need to maintain unity amid intense diversity. Friends, here we need to understand that strong union does not mean that states are just municipal branches of the union. The states have constitutionally recognized authority. Here in Indian Constitution, federalism is therefore not administrative generosity from the center. It is a constitutional power sharing. Here you need to understand that a mature answer avoids both extremes. India is neither a loose confederation nor an ordinary unitary state. Its federal system has a pronounced centralizing tilt and flexible features. Friends, now let us have some understanding about judicial review. Here, if we say that the Constitution is supreme, this statement needs an institutional mechanism. The judicial review system is the authority of the constitutional courts to examine whether legislations and governmental actions conform to the Constitution. Judicial review may protect fundamental rights, protect the federal structure of the country, protects the federal distribution of the legislative powers, and preserve the constitutional procedures and limits. Friends, here we need to go very carefully. This does not mean that courts govern every policy question. The courts test legality and constitutionality, and elected institutions retains broad spaces for policy choices. Friends, here do not confuse judicial review with judicial activism. Judicial review is the constitutional validity checking function, whereas judicial activism describes more assertive judicial posture and it is debated case by case. Friends, here The constitutional referee analogy is very useful to understand. Understand courts as a constitutional referee, but remember that the referee also acts as per the rule. Judicial independence matters because the validity check must not depend upon the political convenience of the government being checked. Friends, now let's have a little idea about the doctrine of basic structure. Friends, as we discussed earlier, that Indian constitution is amendable and that flexibility allows democratic adaptation. But in Keshwanand Bharti case in 1973, the Supreme Court articulated the basic structure doctrine. It states that Parliament amending power is wide, yet it cannot alter the constitution so as to destroy its basic structure and identity. Friends, this doctrine is not a single article containing a closed list. Its components have emerged through cases. Friends, for today's understanding, retain the only principle that the amendments are possible and constitutional destruction is not. Friends, this reconciles change with continuity. A living constitution must be capable of reform, but an amendment procedure cannot be converted into a legal route for abolishing constitutionalism itself. The doctrine therefore reinforces the limited character of all constituted power, including the constituent power exercised by the Parliament. Friends, this is the brief introduction related to these three topics, that is federal structure of the India, judicial review, and the doctrine of basic structure. The detailed chapters related to these topics will come later. So friends, now we all know what a constitution does, what kind of constitutional democracy India is. The next question is unavoidable, that how did India reach this constitution? Friends, in chapter 2, lecture 1, we will start the historical journey of Indian constitution from colonial rule to the making of the Indian constitution. So friends, this is it for now. We will meet in a next lecture, that is chapter 2, lecture 1. Till then, goodbye.